Emma, you don't mind sleeping in the basement, do you? My sister Victoria's voice carried that familiar tone of false sweetness as she stood in the doorway of her pristine colonial home. Behind her, I could see workers arranging elaborate Christmas decorations throughout the living room. Crystal ornaments hung from a 12-foot tree, and garlands draped every surface. The house looked like a magazine spread, which was exactly what Victoria wanted. Ashton's parents are taking the guest rooms, and honestly, the basement is quite cozy. I had it renovated last year. I stood on her front porch, suitcase in hand, having driven 6 hours from Pittsburgh to spend Christmas with family. The December cold bit through my coat, but it felt warmer than Victoria's greeting. Through the window, I watched my brother-in-law Ashton laugh with his parents in the warmth of the living room. Nobody had come to help with my luggage. "The basement," I repeated slowly, letting the words sink in. This wasn't a question. It was a declaration. After 3 years of declining my invitations because my apartment was too small, Victoria was relegating me to her basement for Christmas. My name is Emma Lancaster. I'm 42 years old, and until that moment on Victoria's doorstep, I had spent my entire adult life trying to maintain a relationship with my younger sister. Victoria was 36, beautiful in that polished way that requires constant maintenance, and married to Ashton Whitmore, whose family owned a successful chain of car dealerships across Pennsylvania. They lived in Greenfield Heights, an exclusive suburb where every house cost upward of $1 million. I worked as a commercial real estate analyst, a job that paid well but lacked the glamour Victoria craved. My divorce from Stuart had been finalized 2 years ago, leaving me free but apparently pitiful in my sister's eyes. Victoria had always been competitive, but marriage and money had transformed that competitiveness into something harder and colder. "It's really comfortable down there," Victoria continued, already turning back inside. "There's a bathroom and everything. Come on, it's freezing." I picked up my suitcase and followed her through the grand foyer, past the imported Italian marble floors and the chandelier that probably cost more than my car. The basement stairs creaked as I descended, my suitcase bumping against each step. Victoria didn't offer to help, staying at the top with her arms crossed. The space below was indeed renovated, with gray concrete floors painted to look like hardwood and walls covered in cheap paneling. A single bed sat in the corner, the kind you'd find at a discount furniture store, dressed in plain white linens. One small window near the ceiling let in minimal light. "See, it's nice," Victoria called down. "Dinner's at 6. Ashton's parents want to eat early." The door closed before I could respond, leaving me in the dim basement that smelled faintly of mildew despite the renovations. I sat on the bed, feeling the thin mattress compress beneath me. Above, I could hear footsteps and laughter, the sounds of a family gathering I was apparently not truly part of. My phone buzzed. A text from my colleague Howard Chen. "Hope you're having a great Christmas with family." I stared at the message, then at my surroundings, and something inside me shifted. I didn't unpack. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into the real estate database I used for work. Years of analyzing commercial properties had taught me how to find information quickly, and I was curious about something. I typed in Victoria's address and pulled up the property records. The house had been purchased 3 years ago for $1.2 million. The mortgage was substantial, even with Ashton's family money. I dug deeper, accessing public records that showed a second mortgage taken out last year. They were more leveraged than their lifestyle suggested. Then I searched for other properties in the neighborhood. Greenfield Heights was exclusive, but not impossible to break into if you knew what you were looking for. That's when I found it, the house directly next door to Victoria's, currently in foreclosure. The elderly owner had passed away 6 months ago, and the family was eager to sell. The asking price was $950,000, recently reduced from $1.1 million. I knew from my work that foreclosures often sold below market value, especially during the holidays when buyers were scarce. I pulled up my own financial records, calculating quickly. My divorce settlement, my savings, my excellent credit score from years of careful financial management. It was possible. Barely, but possible. Dinner that evening was exactly what I'd expected. Victoria had prepared an elaborate meal that she barely touched, too busy ensuring everyone noticed her efforts. Ashton's parents, Donald and Beatrice Whitmore, held court at the head of the table, discussing their recent cruise and their plans to expand the dealership chain. I sat at the far end, closest to the kitchen, while Victoria fluttered around serving courses. "So Emma," Beatrice said, her voice carrying the same artificial sweetness as Victoria's, "Victoria mentioned you're still in that little apartment in Pittsburgh. Have you thought about buying something? Real estate is such a good investment." Victoria's eyes flicked to me, a warning in them. "Don't embarrass me," they said. I smiled pleasantly and cut into my salmon. "Actually, I've been looking at properties recently. The market has some interesting opportunities right now." "Oh," Donald leaned forward slightly. "What areas are you considering?" Before I could answer, Victoria interrupted. "Emma is probably looking at condos, something low maintenance for a single woman." The emphasis on single was deliberate. Ashton shifted uncomfortably in his seat but said nothing, as usual. "Actually," I said calmly, "I'm interested in Greenfield Heights." The silence that followed was delicious. Victoria's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Ashton finally looked up from his plate. Beatrice and Donald exchanged confused glances, unsure if this was a joke. "Greenfield Heights?" Victoria's laugh was sharp. "Emma, houses here start at $1 million. That's a bit out of your range, isn't it?" I took a sip of wine, letting the moment stretch. "The house next door is in foreclosure. It's listed at $950,000, but I think they'd accept less. It needs work, but the bones are good. I analyzed the comparables this afternoon. It's actually undervalued by about 15%. Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. "You're joking." "Why would I joke about real estate? It's literally my profession." I turned to Donald, who was watching me with new interest. "The previous owner maintained it well until the last year of her life. The family wants a quick sale. I'm thinking of making an offer tomorrow." Ashton cleared his throat. "Tomorrow's Christmas Eve." "Banks don't close for the holidays," I replied. "Neither do motivated sellers." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous. You can't afford a house here." I remained seated, my voice steady and calm. "Victoria, I appreciate your concern about my finances, but I'm quite capable of managing them. My credit score is excellent, I have substantial savings, and my divorce settlement was generous. Stuart might have been a terrible husband, but he was fair about the property division." What I didn't mention was that Stuart had been a financial advisor who taught me everything about investments before our marriage fell apart. While Victoria had been spending money on designer handbags, I'd been quietly building a portfolio that would make most people my age envious. Beatrice looked intrigued now. "You're serious about this?" "Completely. The house needs cosmetic updates, which actually works in my favor. I can negotiate a lower price and handle the renovations myself. I have contractors I've worked with on commercial properties who owe me favors." Victoria's hands trembled as she gripped the back of her chair. "You cannot move in next door to me. You just can't." "Why not?" I asked innocently. "I thought you'd enjoy having family close by. Isn't that what you always said when you criticized my apartment in Pittsburgh?" After dinner, I excused myself and went back to the basement. Above me, I could hear raised voices, Victoria's high-pitched complaints and Ashton's lower, calmer responses. I ignored them and made phone calls. The first was to my financial advisor, confirming my available liquid assets. The second was to the listing agent for the foreclosure property. She answered on the third ring, sounding surprised to receive a call so close to Christmas. "This is Emma Lancaster. I'm interested in the property at 847 Pinehurst Drive in Greenfield Heights. I'd like to schedule a viewing tomorrow morning and potentially make an offer." The agent, whose name was Carolyn Burke, couldn't hide her excitement. "Tomorrow, that's Christmas Eve." "I'm aware. I'm currently staying next door at 849 Pinehurst, and I've done preliminary research on the property. If it meets my expectations in person, I'm prepared to make a cash-equivalent offer with minimal contingencies." Those magic words, cash and minimal contingencies, worked like a charm. We scheduled a viewing for 9 the next morning. After hanging up, I researched Carolyn Burke. She was a top agent in the area with a reputation for closing deals quickly. Perfect. That night, lying on the thin basement mattress, I couldn't sleep. Not from discomfort, but from excitement. Years of analyzing properties for other people had taught me to spot opportunities, and this was the best one I'd seen in years. The house next door wasn't just a good investment. It was a statement. I thought about Victoria's face at dinner, the shock and horror when I'd mentioned buying the property. For years, she'd looked down on me. My smaller apartment, my divorce, my quiet life that lacked her champagne wishes and caviar dreams. She'd always needed to feel superior, to be the successful one with the bigger house and the richer husband. What Victoria never understood was that success isn't about appearances. It's about strategy. She'd mortgaged herself to the hilt to maintain an image, while I'd lived below my means and invested wisely. Now, that patience was about to pay off in the most satisfying way possible. Above me, the house had finally gone quiet. I checked my phone one last time and saw an email from Carolyn Burke confirming our morning appointment. I smiled in the darkness of my basement prison and finally fell asleep. Christmas Eve morning arrived with fresh snow covering Greenfield Heights. I dressed carefully in professional attire, black slacks and a burgundy sweater that said successful, but not trying too hard. Upstairs, I could hear the Whitmore family preparing for their day of holiday festivities. Victoria was in the kitchen when I emerged from the basement, her eyes red-rimmed from either crying or lack of sleep. "You're not really going through with this ridiculous plan, are you?" "I have an appointment at 9, I replied, pouring myself coffee from the expensive machine she'd probably bought to impress guests. "Would you like to come? You could give me your opinion on the property." "My opinion," her voice rose sharply. "My opinion is that you're doing this to humiliate me, to ruin Christmas and make everything about you." I took a sip of coffee, nodding it was slightly bitter. Victoria had never been good at making coffee despite owning a machine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Victoria, this has nothing to do with you. It's a sound investment opportunity in a desirable neighborhood. The fact that it's next door is simply convenient for viewing purposes since I'm already here." Ashton appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his designer sweater and pressed khakis. "Emma, maybe we should talk about this. Victoria's upset, and it is Christmas." "I understand it's Christmas," I replied calmly. "That's exactly why the timing is perfect. Sellers are motivated during the holidays, buyers are scarce, and I have the financial capability to close quickly. In real estate, you don't pass up opportunities because of the calendar." Beatrice entered the kitchen, drawn by the tension. "What's all this commotion?" Victoria turned to her mother-in-law with tears in her eyes. "Emma's trying to buy the house next door just to spite me. She wants to ruin our lives." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "Victoria, your life isn't affected by who lives next door, unless there's some reason you don't want me in this neighborhood." I paused meaningfully. "Some reason you'd prefer I stay at a distance." The color drained from Victoria's face. She knew exactly what I was implying. For years, she'd kept me at arm's length, declining invitations, making excuses, always too busy with her important life to deal with her divorced older sister. Now that distance was about to vanish, and she was panicking. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked out Victoria's front door and up the driveway to the house next door. Carolyn Burke was already waiting, a professional smile on her face despite the holiday. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with the confident air of someone who'd closed 1,000 deals. "Emma Lancaster," she extended her hand. "Thank you for meeting me on Christmas Eve. I have to admit I'm impressed by your commitment." "I believe in acting when opportunity presents itself," I replied, shaking her hand firmly. "Shall we?" The house was beautiful. Or rather, it had been beautiful and would be again with the right attention. The late owner had maintained it well until her final illness, but the last year had taken its toll. The interior needed painting. The hardwood floors required refinishing, and the kitchen was hopelessly outdated. But the structure was solid, the layout was superior to Victoria's house, and the lot was actually larger. The family is motivated to sell, Carolyn explained as we toured the empty rooms. The estate wants to close before year-end for tax purposes. They've already moved everything out, so possession can be immediate. I nodded, mentally calculating costs and timelines. What's the bottom line? What would they actually accept? Carolyn studied me carefully, trying to gauge how serious I was. I'd dealt with enough agents to recognize the look. They're asking $950,000, but between us, I think they'd take $875,000 for a clean, quick close. I walked to the window and looked out at Victoria's house. I could see her standing at her own window, watching us. The irony was perfect. I'll offer $850,000, all cash equivalent, 30-day close, minimal inspection contingency. They fix nothing. I take it as is. Carolyn's eyes widened. That's aggressive. That's business. The house needs $100,000 in updates to match neighborhood standards. I'm saving them time and uncertainty. They can accept my offer and have this closed by mid-January, or they can wait for a traditional buyer who will want every outlet replaced and every crack patched. I turned from the window to face her. What do you think they'll choose? She smiled. I think you know real estate, Ms. Lancaster. Let me make some calls. We sat in her car with the heat running while she contacted the estate attorney handling the sale. I listened to her side of the conversation, the professional negotiations that I knew by heart from my own work. When she hung up, she was grinning. They'll take $860,000. Final offer. I extended my hand. Deal. By noon on Christmas Eve, I had signed a purchase agreement for the house next door to my sister. The estate's attorney was thrilled to have a solid offer during the holidays, and my pre-approval letter from the bank made everything move quickly. Carolyn Burke looked happier than most people do on Christmas morning. I've never closed a deal this fast on Christmas Eve, she admitted as we finalized the paperwork in her car. You're either very impulsive or very prepared. I'm never impulsive, I replied, signing the last form. I've been prepared for an opportunity like this for years. It just happened to present itself now. I returned to Victoria's house to find a family meeting in progress. They sat in the living room, Ashton and his parents on one sofa, Victoria perched on the edge of an armchair, all of them turning to stare as I entered. Is it done? Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. The purchase agreement is signed. I close in 30 days. I set my bag down and smiled pleasantly. I'll be your new neighbor by the end of January. Isn't that wonderful? We'll finally be close, just like you always said family should be. Beatrice spoke up, her tone cautious. Emma, dear, that's quite a financial commitment. Are you certain you can manage it? I settled into the chair opposite them, completely at ease. I appreciate your concern, Beatrice, but yes, I'm quite certain. My financial advisor confirmed everything this morning. The mortgage is well within my means, and I have reserves for the renovation work. What I didn't mention was that I'd been planning something like this for over a year. Not specifically a house next to Victoria, but a move into real estate investment. I'd spent 2 decades analyzing properties for corporations and watching other people build wealth while I collected a salary. The divorce from Stuart had been my wake-up call to start building something for myself. Donald Whitmore leaned forward, his businessman instincts engaged. What are your plans for the property? Flip it. Live in it, I replied. Though I'll renovate first. I'm thinking modern farmhouse aesthetic, updated kitchen, refinished floors, new paint throughout. It'll be stunning when I'm finished. Victoria made a strangled sound. Ashton put his hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off and stood abruptly. This is insane. You're doing this to torture me, to ruin everything I've built here. I met her eyes calmly. Victoria, what exactly have I ruined? I bought a house. People do it every day. Christmas Day was tense. Victoria barely spoke to me, leaving the room whenever I entered. Ashton tried to play peacemaker, but his heart wasn't in it. The Whitmores seemed more intrigued than upset, particularly Donald, who kept asking me questions about real estate markets and investment strategies. "You know," he said during Christmas dinner, "we've been considering diversifying beyond the dealerships. Real estate seems like a stable option." "It can be," I agreed, "if you choose the right properties and don't overextend yourself financially." I said this last part while looking directly at Victoria, who flushed and focused intently on her plate. After dinner, I went back to the basement and made more calls. I contacted 3 contractors I'd worked with on commercial renovations, asking if they'd be interested in a residential project starting in February. All 3 were enthusiastic. Winter was typically slow for construction, and they appreciated the guaranteed work. I also called my office and requested an extended leave of absence. My boss, Franklin Torres, was surprised but supportive. "You're taking time off to renovate a house? That's not like you, Emma." "I'm making a change," I replied. "It's time I invested in myself instead of everyone else's properties." The day after Christmas, Victoria finally confronted me directly. She came down to the basement where I was packing my things, preparing to drive back to Pittsburgh. Her face was blotchy from crying, her perfect makeup smudged. "Why are you doing this to me?" she demanded. "What did I ever do to deserve this?" I stopped folding clothes and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. "You put me in the basement, Victoria. After I drove 6 hours to spend Christmas with family, after 3 years of you being too busy to visit me, you put me in the basement like I was an embarrassment." "It's just a room," she protested weakly. "No, it's a statement. It's how you see me. Less than, not worthy of a real guest room, not important enough to make space for." I resumed packing. "The house next door isn't revenge. It's a reminder that you don't get to decide my worth." Victoria sank onto the basement steps, her designer outfit looking out of place against the cheap paneling. "I didn't mean it like that. Ashton's parents are less important than your sister," I finished. "Yes, you made that clear." Victoria was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain, nothing like her usual confident tone. "You always made everything look so easy. School, work, even your marriage before it ended." I felt like I had to prove I was just as successful, just as put together. I sat down on the bed, facing her. "Victoria, I'm divorced and living in a 1-bedroom apartment. What about that screams successful to you? You have your career, people respect you, you don't need anyone." She wiped at her eyes, smearing her mascara further. "I needed Ashton's money to feel important. I needed this house and these things. Without them, I'm just the younger sister who never measured up." For the first time, I saw past the designer clothes and the attitude to the insecure woman beneath. But understanding her motivation didn't excuse her behavior. "We both have issues to work on," I said finally. "But treating me like I'm less than you isn't helping either of us." She nodded miserably. "Are you really going to buy that house?" "I already did. The agreement is signed." Victoria left without another word, and I finished packing. January passed in a flurry of activity. The house purchase closed on schedule, and I took possession of the keys on a cold Tuesday afternoon. Carolyn Burke handed them over with a smile and a bottle of champagne. "Congratulations, Emma. I have a feeling you're going to do amazing things with this property." I stood in the empty house, my house, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about proving something to Victoria anymore. This was about building a life I actually wanted instead of settling for what seemed practical or safe. The contractors started work the following week. I'd taken a 2-month leave from my job, planning to oversee the renovation personally. Each morning, I drove from my Pittsburgh apartment to Greenfield Heights, spending 10 to 12 hours on site, making decisions about paint colors and cabinet hardware and light fixtures. Victoria watched from her windows. I could see her curtains move whenever I arrived or left, but she never came over, and I didn't invite her. We were neighbors now, separated by a property line and years of resentment that wouldn't vanish just because we were geographically closer. The work progressed quickly. Walls were painted in warm neutrals that made the rooms feel larger and brighter. The old carpet was ripped out, revealing beautiful hardwood floors that just needed refinishing. By mid-February, the transformation was remarkable. The kitchen had new white cabinets with brass hardware, granite countertops in a soft gray, and stainless steel appliances. The bathrooms were updated with modern fixtures and subway tile. Every room felt fresh and inviting, a complete contrast to the dated interior from just weeks before. I documented everything on social media, posting photos of the renovation progress. The response was overwhelming. Friends from college I hadn't spoken to in years commented on the posts. Colleagues expressed admiration. Even strangers asked questions about my design choices and contractor recommendations. Victoria sent a text message in late February. "The house looks good." Just 3 words, but they felt like progress. I didn't respond immediately, letting her wonder. 2 days later, I replied, "Thank you. Would you like a tour when it's finished?" The response came quickly. "Maybe." Donald Whitmore, however, did want a tour. He showed up one afternoon with a thermos of coffee and genuine curiosity about the renovation. "I've been watching the progress from next door," he admitted. "You've added significant value to this property." We walked through the rooms, and I explained my choices and the costs involved. Donald was impressed. "You've turned $100,000 in renovations into at least $200,000 in added value. That's better than most of our dealership investments." The conversation with Donald led to something unexpected. He asked if I'd be interested in consulting for the Whitmore dealership chain, analyzing potential real estate acquisitions for new locations. "Ashton handles operations, but neither of us has your eye for property value and development potential." I considered the offer carefully. It would mean working with my brother-in-law's family, which could complicate things with Victoria. But it was also an opportunity to expand beyond my current job, to build something entrepreneurial. "I'd need to structure it as independent consulting," I replied, "not as an employee, and I'd want it in writing that family dynamics don't affect business decisions." Donald laughed. "Fair enough, I'll have our attorney draft something." Victoria was livid when she found out. She called me for the first time in months, her voice sharp with anger. "You're taking a job with Ashton's family now? You're really trying to insert yourself into every part of my life, aren't you?" "Donald approached me," I replied calmly. "And it's not a job, it's consulting work. My expertise has value, Victoria. The fact that it might benefit your in-laws doesn't make it about you." She hung up without responding, but I knew this wasn't over. By early March, I moved into my renovated house. The furniture was a mix of pieces from my apartment and new items chosen to complement the updated space. I'd gone for comfortable elegance, nothing as showy as Victoria's formal living room, but warm and inviting. The first night in my new home, I sat on my back deck with a glass of wine, looking at the stars. From next door, I could hear Victoria and Ashton arguing. Their voices carried through the cold night air, though I couldn't make out specific words. Just the tone, frustrated and exhausted. My phone buzzed with a text from Carolyn Burke. "Saw your renovation posts online. House looks incredible. If you ever want to sell, I have buyers lined up." I smiled at the message. The property had already appreciated significantly, just as I'd calculated. But I wasn't interested in selling. This house represented something more valuable than money. It represented choosing myself, building something on my own terms, refusing to accept someone else's judgment of my worth. Another text came through, this one from Howard at work. "Coming back soon. Office isn't the same without you." I'd been thinking about that. My leave of absence was nearly over, but the consulting work with Whitmore dealerships was already generating substantial income. Combined with my savings and the equity in this house, I had options I'd never had before. In late March, I made my decision. I submitted my resignation to the commercial real estate firm where I'd worked for 18 years. Franklin Tors tried to convince me to stay, offering a raise and more flexibility, but I'd already moved beyond what that job could offer me. "I'm starting my own consulting practice," I explained during our final meeting. Residential and commercial property analysis, renovation planning, investment strategy. I have enough clients lined up to make it viable, including the Whitmore dealership chain. Franklin shook my hand with genuine warmth. I always knew you were too talented to stay in someone else's shadow. Good luck, Emma. Victoria found out about my resignation through Ashton. She appeared at my front door the next evening, looking uncertain and uncomfortable on my porch. It was the first time she'd come to my house since I'd moved in. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside, letting her enter. She looked around at the renovated space, taking in the carefully chosen furniture and the artwork on the walls. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "Really beautiful, nothing like the basement." "No," I agreed, "nothing like the basement." We stood in awkward silence until Victoria finally spoke. "I'm sorry. For Christmas, for the basement, for everything. I was wrong." Victoria's apology hung in the air between us. I could see the effort it took her to say those words, to admit she'd been wrong. For someone who built her identity on appearing perfect, this was significant. "Thank you," I replied. "I appreciate that." She walked to the window that overlooked both our yards. "Donald talks about you constantly now, about your eye for property value and your business sense. Ashton's even said we should ask your advice about our own finances." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out the sister I put in the basement is smarter than all of us." "It's not about being smarter," I said, joining her at the window. "It's about making different choices. You chose appearances and status. I chose patience and strategy. Neither is inherently better, but there are consequences to both." Victoria turned to face me. "Are we going to be okay, as sisters?" I considered the question carefully. The hurt from Christmas hadn't vanished, and years of Victoria's condescension couldn't be erased by one apology. But living next door to each other meant we'd have to find some way forward. "We're going to be neighbors," I replied. "The sister part that'll take more time and more than just words." She nodded, accepting this. "Fair enough." 6 months after that Christmas in the basement, my life had transformed completely. My consulting business was thriving, with clients ranging from the Whitmore dealerships to individual families planning renovations. I'd been featured in a local business magazine as an example of successful career reinvention. Victoria and I had achieved a careful peace. We weren't close the way sisters in movies are close, but we were cordial. She sometimes asked my advice about things, and I sometimes accepted her invitations for coffee. It was progress. The real victory wasn't the house, though I loved living there. It wasn't the successful business or the financial security. The real victory was reclaiming my sense of self-worth from someone who'd tried to diminish it. One evening, as I sat on my deck watching the sunset, I thought about that Christmas when Victoria put me in the basement. At the time, it felt like humiliation. Now, I recognized it as the catalyst I'd needed. Sometimes the worst moments push us toward the best changes. My phone buzzed with a message from a new potential client, someone who'd seen my magazine interview and wanted help analyzing an investment property. I smiled and typed back a response, already looking forward to the challenge. The house next door stood as my daily reminder that worth isn't assigned by others. It's claimed by yourself, and once you claim it, no one can take it away.